Yo, what's going on, guys? Rago here. So welcome back to the second part of our video on controlling your kite with the edge of your board. And this week we're gonna do 3 tips on how to master your kiteboard skills. So kind of a funny thing, but in kiteboarding, it seems like a lot of kiteboarders don't actually know how to ride a board. And you know, a lot of what this is kiteboarding is really unique in the fact that there's so many things going on, and you get a lot of people coming into kiteboarding with no prior sports history, which is awesome. And then you also have people who are crossing over from other sports because of the the freedom that it gives you and just the more opportunities to progress in different conditions and do different things with your board. So you get a lot of surfers that cross over, you get a lot of wakeboarders and snowboarders who are interested in learning how to kite. And even with those riders who do have the board skills, it's a funny thing, but while you're learning how to fly the kite and do all those different things, you can pick up a lot of bad habits that will actually hold you back as you progress. So if you can learn how to put the boarding back into your kiteboarding and pick up these skills, you're gonna progress faster, you're gonna look better in the air, and most important, you're gonna have more fun kiteboarding. So with all that said, let's get to it. So for the first part of this video, I just want to cover the riding stance. And what I mean here is, are you being held up by your kite the whole time, or are you actually riding the board? So if you think about that for a second, with kiteboarding, there's different times when you're going to be doing different things. And what happens is a lot of kiteboarders, they get caught up in the habit of always trying to rock upwind. You're always in that position where you're leaning back in the harness is connected to the kite, which is holding you up, and you're always just digging that edge so hard, trying to rock upwind. And what happens with a lot of riders is they get a habit of always being in that position. And you'll see the guy who's riding, and he's really leaned back and cranking it, and he goes for a jump, and he goes up awkwardly, and he's kind of dangling behind the kite, and then he comes down, and he touches down, and he's still leaning back, and he kind of falls on his back, and the kite might drop him in the water. And maybe you've experienced this yourself even just a little bit, where when you go to do a jump, you feel like unathletic, and you find like it's hard to roll, or it's hard to move, or it's hard to get into a grab, and you just feel very out of control when you're in the air, and you might feel kind of stiff and awkward. And what happens is people are in the habit of kind of like building that muscle memory where they're always in that rocked back edge upwind position. And you kind of have to open your body up. So like that first video we talked about, where you learn how to ride on the board and you're getting more into an athletic stance. So when I say athletic stance, think of like a surfer who's dropping into a wave, or a snowboarder going down a hill, a skateboarder, a wakeboarder, anybody from any other board sport. So their weight is over the board. Their shoulders are stacked over their hips, stacked over their knees, over their ankles, and then they're distributing their weight accordingly to control the edge of their board. So it's the same thing with kiteboarding. You want to have that edge control and have that balance where you can get more into that athletic kind of semi-squat position. So you really should practice going downwind. You should practice the drills from our first video where you actually learn how to control the kite with the edge of your board, and try to get out of the habit of just always being in that riding stance. And this actually applies even when you're in the air. So when you do edge upwind and come up, you want to get more like tucked kind of into a ball, whether you're gonna do a roll or a flip, or even just go for a grab, or just drift through the air. Whatever it is, you want to go from that loading position into the athletic position. And what really gets most people is they try to land back into that upwind position. So this, most importantly, might just apply even just to landing. So if you watched that first video where I talked about doing like the little S curves, flying the kite with one hand, learning how to ride on the board, going downwind, you know, more in that kind of like wakeboarding stance, you should practice that a ton, because when you land from any jump, you don't want to land rocked back going across to the wind. You want to land in the athletic position. So practice that. Practice riding on your board not just trying to rock upwind. So moving on to step 2, we're gonna go more into detail on controlling the kite with the edge of your board and what that does. So with the edging of your board, if you remember that last video, we talked about like riding at the kite and kind of letting the kite drift a bit more forward, deeper in the window. When you dig your edge, you can really kind of send the kite more forward towards the edge of the window, and you can really control your board speed. So for landings, you can land riding at the kite, and it'll actually, if you go too far downwind, it'll kind of shoot forward and actually take a lot of power out of the kite, or it might just kind of slack and drift forward with you. You can really learn to control your board speed and how efficiently you're getting upwind with the edge of your board. So if you're riding at the kite, you can kind of set it a little bit deeper and you can feel it drift forward in front of you. And then as you start to edge back against the kite, you might notice a lot of kites will come forward to the edge of the wind window. And what this will do is it'll actually put you in a better position where the kite will pull you more upwind into a more upwind position, which is that riding stance I talked about where people are always cranking against the kite. But you can also control your speed by setting it in a better position and then edging it where you need it to be and kind of coming off that edge and not cranking down so hard. So there's really a ton of different advantages with learning how to control your kite with the edge of the board. So you can really dig the edge of your board and shoot the kite further forward in the edge of the wind window, and this is actually gonna rock you upwind a little bit better. It's gonna slow you down and take some speed out of the kite. So with the original kites, we didn't have a whole lot of D-power. You couldn't just push the bar away and dump all the power out of the kite. You actually had to edge that kite kind of further forward where it was sitting at the edge of the window, and you would actually be able to slow yourself down. And then likewise, it's kind of a funny thing, but you can also take power out of the kite by riding down very quickly, and you're going to pick up speed but take power out of the kite. So you might put more power into the kite by putting it at the edge of the window, but also kind of slow down, and then you can also take some power out by riding downwind. And I know that sounds kind of funny, but as you experiment and practice this, you'll see what I mean about finding that balance where you can pick up a bunch of board speed and then your lines kind of go slack and you're not really feeling a lot of pull from the kite, but you're going a lot faster. And it depends on the angle that you take. It depends on how far you're going downwind. Are you going slightly across to the wind? Are you going straight downwind? And are you rocking upwind? And it's going to be a little bit different for every kite. So you really need to experiment with your kite and just see how it responds depending on the model you're using. So if it's an all-around kite, it's going to be less responsive. If you're using a crossover kite, it's going to be a lot more responsive. But just practice that S-turn drill that we talked about in the first video, and just experiment with the edging of your kite and learning how to place it if you even have a kite that you can place in the wind window. And then the next thing to talk about is the balance between how much you're on your board and how much you have the kite holding you up. So in lighter winds, you can keep the kite higher and then have the kite lift you from that harness point, and that'll actually give you a light wind advantage. And then likewise, when you're riding in stronger winds, you can get back up into that athletic stance we talked about. You're riding more on the board. You're not using a whole lot of kite power here. So depending on if you're in strong winds or light winds, start experimenting with this and find what works best in that certain situation for you to give you the best advantage, whether you're trying to get upwind or if you're just trying to do a trick or go downwind or whatever it is you're doing. And then lastly, let's talk about where you're edging. So a common mistake that a lot of people make is they're going to put too much back foot pressure. So just like I see a lot of riders who are always in that really rigid, kites holding them up, edging super hard position, a lot of people actually, in an effort to get upwind better, put too much pressure on their tail. And ideally, you want to have the balance somewhere between kind of almost the middle of your feet on the middle of that back heel side rail or toe side rail if you're riding toe side. But somewhere between the feet is kind of the ideal point, and then you can play with this, again, depending on the power of the wind that you're in. So on to this point of the balance of where your weight is on the feet and how much you're on the board and how much the kite's holding you up. If you have a lot of back foot pressure, you're going to slow down your speed and kind of bog yourself down. And if you put the pressure more in the middle between both of your feet, you can kind of accelerate your speed. So when you pair this with coming off of your edge and riding in that athletic stance and going downwind a bit, you can pick up some speed, and then pair that with where the balance is. So you're going slightly downwind, and now your weight between your feet is more on that middle of the rail. You can really pick up a whole lot more speed, which translates to height when you're doing tricks. Height for send jumps and power for kite low jumps. And then if you're in stronger winds or you just need to reduce the power, again, you can kind of play with this. You can kind of lean back a little bit more and slow down, and you can put a little bit more back foot heel pressure to kind of shoot the kite forward and take some of the power out of the kite. So it's really kind of a delicate balance of like learning how to control your speed. So the more speed you can build up, the higher you're going to go, or the more powerful the trick's going to be. And then, you know, line tension is important as well. So if you come off your edge and set the kite a bit deeper and then load up really quickly, you can put a lot of tension into the kite very fast and it's going to rip you off the water. Or you can kind of use more of a mild edge, and depending on the speed that you bring, how hard you cut up, how much tension you're loading into the lines, you can really control a lot of factors. So all these different things are just variables for you to start experimenting with and mastering. And once you start paying attention to these things, you'll get really good at controlling your kite and your board and your body while you're on the water. So the last thing that I want to talk about is the approach for tricks. And this kind of brings the first 2 points together again. And this is something that I see most kiteboarders get wrong. And you can really spot an experienced, advanced, good kiteboarder from a new kiteboarder from the approach they take on their trick. So with kiteboarding, you know, you're riding across to the wind, you load going upwind, and you land going downwind. And what I see a lot of kiteboarders do is they try to land in the same direction that they took off. So unlike a lot of other board sports where, you know, with snowboarding, you go off a jump and you land going in pretty much the same direction, kiteboarding is kind of like going off of a hip. So you actually change directions while you're in the air. So I'm going to make an animation here and show you the correct way to do this. So if you go for a jump and you're landing on your back 9 times out of 10, or if your landings just feel super powered and you feel very out of control when you're landing a trick, or you might feel dangly or anything like that, it's probably because you're edging back too hard and then you're not getting into the athletic stance and you're trying to land going in the same direction that you were traveling when you started. So when you can piece this together in your mind, it's going to get a lot easier for you. So just remember that you're going to go across to the wind, load upwind, go downwind, land still going downwind in the athletic boarding stance, and then shift back into your upwind riding stance. So that's pretty much it for this video. And make sure you click the eye icon to go to the written blog so I can go into more detail there and you can read about edging. And I'll include some things about like wave riding and how the edging of the kite might apply there, and just give you a lot more detail than I could possibly go into this video where I'm kind of shooting from the hip here. So if you guys found this video helpful, please give it a thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe, and we'll catch you next week.